trying to convey?
Usually it's an idea I start off with, something like, with the Infinity Gauntlet, it was like, I went to a Catholic grade school and had, church 6 days a week.
Right.
You know, it was enough to turn anybody into a heathen.
Right.
But basically, I thought, well, wonder if you had God who was bloody insane. And so that's where we sort of went from there. And the theme sort of, for me, always sort of developed as they go along rather than something I want to do right from the start.
Okay.
And, you know, a lot of times they don't have themes. It's just these crazy stories that they have their own life all to themselves.
Okay, so you kind of like a pantser, you just like write as you go, and then just the story just surprises you.
Yeah, more so in the beginning. You know, at first they weren't so strict about wanting a complete plot. Roy was suddenly editing 26 books up there. You must be David.
Hi, and you're just
I'm
oh
doing
my gosh.
that.
I'm not worthy.
Did you bring a book?
Which one now?
Anyone.
Yeah, did you bring
Apparently
something
we
to
have to.
display?
You have to leave if you don't have a
I
book.
have-
City of Heroes will go
I
on
do
display.
have plenty of my own stuff in here.
Okay.
That's what we're talking
Okay.
That's what you got to put up there.
Cool, all right.
What was I saying?
You're talking about Catholic school and...
Oh, yes. So that was basically going off from what was, if you had God was crazy, and it sort of worked itself into there.
Okay.
I didn't realize until afterwards that I had sort of given them the theme for how they were going to change him by eliminating Mistress Death. I had sort of, in an earlier issue of Silver Surfer, had him setting up for trying to kill off half the population,
Right.
or just to get things right.
Which, by
And,
the way, that is scary AF. That was like, reading about that, I was...
well, then
Serious?
I quickly got rid of that because if I realized you got that omnipotence, why not just double everything up instead?
Yeah.
And they fell into that in the movie. Now there's a Bart Sears mime going around going, hey, if you could do anything, why didn't you just make more resources?
Yeah, right.
But it still works out pretty good as a movie.
Good. And so, and now you have, and you were just talking about this the other day, I think, not stalking you, I promise.
Okay.
But you have...
It's called research.
Yeah, it's research.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So you have that Kickstarter going right
Yeah.
now for some new stuff that you're working on. So did you come up with this idea, or they were just like, give us something, please? We need Jim
Oh,
Starlin.
no. The art book, I sort of, they did that with.
Okay.
So
So you've had this big collection of just sketches that you wanted to...
yeah, there was a lot of things that, you know, I did an 8-page Captain Marvel Shazam story that they never used.
Okay.
And so we threw that into the book, and a lot of different things. But the novel, the novella, is part of a series of books I've written that we're just getting published now. They've been on Kindle for a bit,
Okay.
at least 2 of them, and I just finished the 3rd one, and now I've got to start working on the 4th one as we get a hard copy publisher.
Very cool.
So I'm doing it all wrong.
Yeah. Hey, but you know, if it's still getting published, that's awesome.
Yeah, I just figured it would get published at its own time. I just have to keep up with the computer stuff on it.
Yeah.
I have to keep going back to it. Oh, man, this is really dated. Let's update this a little bit.
Yeah. I've gone back to old manuscripts that I've written. I've been like, there's some stuff that's salvageable, there's some that's awful, but there's some stuff that's salvageable, and I'm like, oh, this is really good. Oh, okay, VHS. No, let me just get rid of VHS. That's not.
Yeah,
we don't do that anymore.
I had a whole section in the 2nd book of a character who doing virtual reality production, movie production, and they're already doing it now.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm going, okay, got to update this.
Yeah, I guess, okay. The reason we're talking about this is because I love DC, not going to talk bad about the people, but when Detective Comics started way back when, it was not as inclusive as it could have been, and it wasn't as tolerant as it could have been. Like the very first hero, a guy named Slam, was fighting these yellow villains, which of course they were Chinese people, and they were drawn.
And they were yellow.
Yeah, and they were literally painted yellow, and they were drawn with slants for eyes, and they all had the top, one little strand of hair for a top knot, and they had the big buck teeth, and so that was how it was perceived, which is obviously completely wrong. And it's for people like me and for people like David, when you're looking at those and you're a person of color and you can't see yourself in the character, that's tough. So I'm very grateful that comics have come so far, and they've become so much more inclusive of different people of color and different religions and different genders and different ages, all of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I would like to introduce the people on the panel here. And bear with me because I have it on my phone. So sorry. Okay, so we have Jim Starlin. And Jim is an American comics artist and writer. With a career dating back to the early 1970s, he is best known for cosmic tales and space opera, for revamping the Marvel Comics characters Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock, and for creating or co-creating the Marvel characters Thanos, Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, and Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. He would also go on to write the Infinity Gauntlet series. Later for DC Comics, he drew many of their iconic characters, especially Darkseid and other characters from Jack Kirby's Fourth World. For Epic Illustrated, he created his own character, Dreadstar. So this is Jim Starlin.
Thank you for all the hard work on that intro.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for making it easily accessible. To his right is David Nakayama. Originally from Hawaii, he's always had a passion for art, comic books, and video games. These days, he's living in the Bay Area and working as a senior 2D concept artist on several different titles for San Francisco-based, is it Kixeye?
That's old. Jam City these days.
Jam City these days.
We just put out the Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery Game. Anyone play?
Yay! Can you talk to them about making the energy levels go up quicker?
You've been reading the message boards, I see.
Please get on that. No. He also moonlights as a cover artist for Marvel Comics, among others. So let's hear from David. And I'm Jo Whittemore. I write middle grade novels, humorous, science fiction, fantasy. My current series is Supergirl's based on the CW television show and set in that world. And that's me. Yeah, me. Okay. So, just very quick housekeeping. Please keep your phones on vibrate as we get started. Okay. Now, and bear with me, I wrote all my questions down. The readership, this question is going to be for both of you. The readership of comics and comic-based literature has changed over the decades to include more women, children, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community. Is Hollywood making comics more alluring to these demographics, or is publishing becoming more open to appeal to them, or is it something else entirely? What is, and you see this also with Black Panther, interested in Black Panther and Black Lightning and all these things. So what is making this diversity become so popular and engaging?
You want to go for it?
By all means.
I'd say it was your second option, that things are changing around. When I first started working up at Marvel, it was all white.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all white guys, except for Murray Severin. Just one wing sticking into it. It wasn't because they were any kind of racist. They were just,
Right.
This was the people, it was a time when all the guys from the 1940s were retiring, and so there was a bunch of new people coming in. And it was a new demographic, and comic books have always sort of been pulled out of the lower classes, the people who work on them, because that's where there's very little academic training required in it, but there is some training that you have to learn. And so we were, 1972, there was a whole group of new people coming in, and not all of them were white.
Right.
And they were basically just, it was a changing of the guard because changing the society in general was happening. In comics, I remember seeing the first black people in comics that Steve Ditko used to stick into the backgrounds of the Spider-Man books.
Thanks, Steve Ditko.
He was the first one, and as far as at the time I got there, I think Black Panther was about the only black character in comics, and there was one Asian in X-Men, Firestorm or something, Fire something or other. But basically, things changed with new people coming in, like Ron Lim and Arvell Jones, Keith, I've forgotten his last name. He was a friend of Arvell's. I'll come back and I'll scream it out at you.
Yeah.
Probably in the middle of David's talk.
I'll be ready.
So things changed, and the demographics in the comics changed.
Yeah, my experience was, I grew up reading Jim Lee X-Men. So for me, the guy drawing main book out there was a Korean guy.
Right.
So by the time I was reading comics, there was plenty of variety to some extent.
Right, yeah,
More
yeah.
than what you're talking about already there. There weren't a lot of women, almost zero, maybe two I could even think of. There was like maybe one colorist and one editor. So we had a long way to go. And I remember in high school reading Reinventing Comics, where Scott McCloud says, these are the ways that comics could be better, and he goes down the list, like the inclusivity, in who's making them, what's in the books. And I would want to ask that guy, how do you feel now? Like, things have definitely moved in the right direction. We're not done, by any means, but many of those things that you were hoping would happen seem to have happened, in terms of inclusivity and both in the creation and the characters of the comics. So.
And I mean, did you even hear people, or at least women, talking about how much they would like to do that kind of job, or was it something that was not even heard of because they didn't think it was an option for them?
Well, that's the most interesting thing, right? Like there were zero, and now there's so many really top-notch A+ female creators out there, like the Jen Bartels and the the Sarah P. Kellys. There are just so many really great female artists. I wonder
Fiona
where.
Staples.
Absolutely,
Huge
put
fan,
that in the same bucket. How did they get into comics?
Right.
That's something was open to them at some point. They felt like this could be for them too, and here they are. And now it's a much more even situation.
So this next question is going to be for Jim. I'm blessed to be working on these Supergirl books, and at a time when homosexuality is more widely accepted, there was a time, up until 1989 actually, when perversions like homosexuality weren't allowed in comic books. So it was just something, and there was actually an editor at a big name publisher, comic publisher, that flat out said no homosexuality. So I read this, and her sister is a homosexual, is lesbian. So I'm allowed to do that, and it's not frowned on at all. But because even back then, I mean, it's not like homosexuality is a new thing. Like, it just happened in 2000. So it's been around, for centuries. So how did you get around that back in that time? How would you get around situations where you're forbidden to write certain things or about certain things, but you knew that there was an audience for it, or an audience that would need it?
Well, in this particular case, I'm limited to what I've done along those lines, mostly with Eros, and mostly I got away with that by just sticking things in the background. Him with an arm around a male instead of a female, and sticking his entourage of sexual partners that would be males sprinkled into it. But other than that, I really never had the opportunity to do much of anything along those lines, just because my stories didn't go that direction.
Right. And is that because, I mean, and there's always going to be something that we come across that it gets some sort of censorship to it. And so is the way to get, do you try and get around it by actually still addressing it, or do you just kind of wait until the day that the censorship ban is lifted?
I usually try and sneak it in somewhere.
That's what I would do.
No, you try and sneak it in past the editors. The editors usually have 8 million things they're editing all at the same time, and you hope that you can get something in the background and stuff like that. And I've got about a 80% rate of being able to pull these stuff
Nice.
through. They occasionally find it and change it.
Yeah.
And then later they find out they better get a French dictionary when they read
Right.
my stuff. But what
I
have
mean,
you
yeah,
found?
do you have that?
Since you said it was a Jim question, I
No,
was,
yeah,
I was
you
rapidly
absolutely-
listening to your answer. One more time with the question.
So for issues like for
How do I
certain
sneak
taboo,
things in?
yeah, for certain things are considered more taboo.
I haven't faced that problem. I mainly do covers. When I did interiors, like on Big Hero 6, that was a book about Japanese people, so it was sort of required to fit that in. I wouldn't say I faced that problem nearly as much. I'm not the writer, I
Right.
think that's when you really get to pushing the envelope of what's the content. But for us artists, we're secondary. After
Do they
that.
tell you specifically what they want the cover to be, or do you get to play around a little?
It comes and goes. It comes sometimes the ideas from the editor, sometimes the ideas from the writer. Sometimes they have no idea what they want to do and they want you to pitch them. I don't want to be toothless. I do want to try to push the envelope when I can.
Right.
but I know I'm making stuff for a mass market. Although, what just occurs to me right now is I just had a cover that is using a foreign culture.
Right.
And I was just asked the other day to cover part of the clothing to make it a little less revealing.
Right.
And so we're literally right now talking about whether we should do that or not.
Yeah.
That conversation is happening, like whether it should be true to what we've seen in pop culture, the representation that exists in pop culture of that part of the world, or should we just be conservative? And I haven't been told what to do yet.
Okay.
But
Plus now there's such a spectrum of different kinds of publications going on, even within more standard companies, that I can now throw Eros into a bed with men and women
Right.
and
Yeah.
not having trouble at all. Mostly what I've been finding is their censorship is more geared around violence and politics these days.
Yeah. I was thinking
Try and
politics
get
might be
something saying anti-Trump up at Marvel right now, and that's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
well, and then Wolverine stopped smoking at one point. There's some sanitization that has happened in comics more
Try and
recently.
make them, and is that to make them so that it's better for the children, so the
I'm not-
children can read it, or
I'm not sure where that comes from, but
That came from Joe Quesada, his father.
oh, there you have it.
oh,
Yeah, there's that.
okay.
And so all the Marvel characters, including Pip Patrol, stopped smoking.
Ah,
Yeah.
now I know.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Wow.
Okay, and so David, this next question is for you.
Okay.
So, and I teased this on social media, but does anyone remember City of Heroes, the game?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So, yeah, it was like so awesome. It was like my favorite. It was an MMORPG, so it's a computer game online that you could play, massive multiplayer game. And I hadn't read comics since I was a little kid. So back when I was a kid, it was like Dot and Little Lotta. It's like stuff nobody knows. It's very obscure. But I read that kind of.
Me.
Yeah.
I'm the old guy on the panel.
No. Well, then I'm old too, because that's the kind of stuff I read, and of course Archie and the gang. And after that, after I was like 10, 11, I didn't touch comics again for a while, and then I started playing City of Heroes, and they actually started sending comics. And so, David, actually, how many of these did you do all the interior art for?
Gosh, like at least a year's worth. So,
Right. So, and you got this because you had the top cow. You'd won the top cow.
Right. That was a project they eventually put me on.
Right.
Yeah.
So so this was kind of like through a weird twist of fate with having David here. So this was the first comic I started reading again as an adult, was City of Heroes. So thanks.
Sure. My pleasure.
But that wasn't my question. That was just
Yeah.
a bunch of talking. Sorry. So my question was, you do that kind of stuff, and you also do the Harry Potter, and you do other kind of game art.
Yeah.
So do you find that it helps get children more involved with comics? Like, do you notice your fan base of children growing as you...
As we do the games?
Right.
Do the games feed the audience of the
Right,
comics?
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I don't know how you would measure that. But I think from a Marvel game standpoint, we also do a game called Avengers Academy, for example. When a movie comes out, we create an event in the game that roughly matches what happens in the films, and so there's this beautiful, synchronous, feeding off of each other, where storylines will come from the comic and be in our game, and then in our movie, and now they're back in the game, and all of Marvel at once is talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, or
Right.
we just did our Thanos cover for Infinity War. We had Thanos show up in our game, young Thanos, because they're all college-age kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like specifically to get children. It's more to capture the casual phone audience, whoever that is.
Okay.
If anything, it's to get women, because they're the casual. Apparently.
I did not.
Yeah. So we started off years ago on an assumption that the art style must be a certain level of casual in order to appeal to this group. Things have changed and matured a lot since then, and we don't
Right.
have those same preconceptions anymore. But that was the original idea.
Good to know. Okay. Let me go back a page. Here, sorry. Okay. So this is what I'm going to talk about next. This is what I brought that Jim worked on, and this is, you co-created one of the first, if not the first, Asian American superhero in mainstream American comics when you created Shang-Chi, because there were other characters that came after that. But this, I think, was one of the very first.
I don't think he's Asian American. I think he was from someplace else. But
So, okay.
side point.
Right, Asian. Okay, let's just say Asian. It was a very daring yet successful move because it was a time when there hadn't been yet introduced a lot of people of color as starring heroes in comics. So, what was your thought process for making this kind of leap of faith that, and was ultimately a very successful because a lot of people, were interested in this particular storyline. But what was your thought process of, hey, we should go into this?
Well, this was something good coming out of all the wrong moves, basically. We basically, Steve Englehart and I wanted to do the Kung Fu TV series that David Carradine was in, but that belonged to Warner Brothers, which was DC Comics, and they weren't interested in doing it, so we started talking to Marvel about this, about doing a martial arts character, and started developing it. And as we were going along, Stan Lee had bought the rights to Fu Manchu. I had never read a Fu Manchu book at the time, so I said, sure, let's throw him in. And we did the first issue. And before then, we had all sorts of things like working with Stan to get him to approve the visuals and stuff like that. And every Asian face that I drew up for the character designs, he didn't like. But he liked the generic head that I put on the costume designs. So that's why Shang-Chi is like mixed race.
Right.
Because Stan wouldn't go with anything that looked like slightly Asian. Not for any nasty reasons, he just thought all heroes should look this way.
Okay.
That's why John Romita kept changing heads on covers. Everybody should look the same. Only after I got done with the first issue that Larry Hama, who worked on all these G.I. Joe books, came up to me and said, "Did you ever read a Fu Manchu book?" And I went, "No." And he said, "Here."
You're like,
And I was horrified.
oh!
I don't know if any of you read any of them, but they're some of the most racist shit you've ever seen in your life.
Oh, man.
I mean, they're really bad. And I didn't realize that. And that's why I only lasted 3 issues on the book. I was kind of embarrassed by the whole thing. And so, like I said, something good may have come out of it, but at the time it all seemed like it was one disaster after another.
Right, and the thing is, I know that you say it was an embarrassment, but again, and one of the first comments I ever made to you was thank you for not, drawing him with slants for eyes. And if you look at the comic, you'll notice he also has normal teeth, like a normal person has teeth. He doesn't have just 2 giant teeth hanging down. And so I was I know you say it was a generic head kind of thing, but for someone like me, it's very important because it's easier for me to see myself as a superhero when it's someone who looks like me, but doesn't look like a caricature of who I am.
Fortunately, my drawing skills then and now are not so much that I tend to end up going for a more generic character as well anyhow. So
it's the everyman, it's the every hero.
Yeah, I'm a storyteller rather than a fine artist.
Right.
So,
and this question will be for both of you. When you're drawing women or people of color or someone who is not your exact demographic, how much research goes into making sure that you're depicting that character or that, race, religion, if you're making sure you're representing them accurately and not doing something, Fu Manchu insulting?
Sure, I can go first. For me, I feel like that is something I'm very, very focused on. I do covers, and there's an expectation that the fidelity be pretty high on a cover. So I just did like a Lando Star Wars cover last week, for example.
Right.
And before I even started it, I did a ton of research on Donald Glover and what does he look like exactly, and exactly what shade of brown is he, and how does he smile, and I really, really look into that very carefully, do a lot of research before I even start. So I guess that more or less answers your question. I care about that deeply.
Yeah, good. Thank you. You should, as you should.
Well, with the male heroes, I can just look in the mirror.
Yeah.
So,
Adam's apple. Got
so
it.
with female characters, I usually do some photo reference, and then here comes another story of something bad happening that brings out something good. Gamora,
Right.
who is kind of a role model character to a lot of young girls now,
absolutely.
surprising to meet my expectations. But basically, I needed to bring in a female character into Warlock because it was all a sausage fest up
Yeah.
until that. And so, put bluntly, and so my friend Alan Weiss had a studio that I used to hang out with, and I needed to design her up. And this is going to be the embarrassing part. I was looking through these skin mags that he had laying around here. They were European skin mags, and one of them had this photo feature of this gal in this fishnet outfit. I thought it was just terrific looking. And so I based Gamora on this pornographic outfit. And much to my surprise, about 6 months later, the Spanish artist Esteban Maroto did the same thing.
Oh, God.
All of a sudden in Erie, there was this character who had almost the same outfit. He had lengthened the black hair down to and went down to the things, but we went, oh my goodness, we have two of them running around here. But she ended up turning into a character that I'm not embarrassed by it in the least.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, but she had some kind of embarrassing
Yeah, and
origins.
one, she
there.
could be strong and be in a skin magazine. You know, she could be a strong woman still. That's all right.
I'll go along with that. Get me out of the hot dog house.
And so now, David, as a person of color and growing up too, were you more aware of what you were seeing in comics and what you weren't seeing? And again, you noticed, that there weren't a lot of female creators.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. I did feel like because of Jim Lee being a focus for my own interest, at the time, and Ron Lim as well, I was definitely reading Surfer because of Ron Lim. I didn't feel like the Asian male perspective was missing because my two favorites were. But as you get older, you do start to notice how very narrow and specific it is. Definitely when you look back, there weren't as many people represented from other races and religions and sexual orientations and stuff at all. It's really obvious now. It's we're looking backward from a place where there's a lot more inclusivity, and it's stark.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's just like Jim was saying, is you can look back now and be like, oh, that was not that best. Yeah, because you can look back and see where the mistakes were made. Because based off of what I would see with films and with television, Asian actors and actresses, they weren't cast in a lot of up until recently. They weren't cast in protagonist roles, right? They were usually the bad guy, the Asian bad guy, the secret, the Yakuza, something like that society. And so now you have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where you have these strong Asian American characters. And I don't want to say, okay, Iron Fist is, but right, but I don't remember the woman's name that is.
Tip of my tongue. Henry?
Thank you, Colleen Wing.
But
So
the actress.
yeah, I was thinking of the character, but yeah, that works.
Colleen
too.
Wing, yeah.
Yeah, and so but
She's great.
now you have characters like that coming up, and with the X-Men, one of the bad ones that not many people saw. You had Olivia Munn.
Psylocke.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So
It's starting to happen.
it's right. It's good to see that you're starting to get more, not just female Asian actresses, but also male Asian actors in stronger, positive roles. Psylocke was normally a good character. She wasn't so much in this movie, but anyway. So
I feel like TV and film has a way to go. Like comics has maybe moved a little further in that direction than TV and film have.
More money involved in the movies, and so they have to have more pressure put onto them to get somebody who's not a big name star to begin with. That's the first thing they look for.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I say, at least with the Netflix shows like Luke Cage, and with some CW shows like Black Lightning, or even with like Supergirl, where you have the homosexual character.
People are making bolder and bolder decisions every season, it seems like.
Right,
So,
which is great because you get to see more diversity and people can see themselves. I mean, in Sense8, not a lot of people unfortunately saw Sense8, but I want to say that it got picked back up by someone. Yeah, okay, one person saw it. That may have been why they got rid of it, but it was one of those shows where you had there was a transgender woman on it, and is it the Asian woman from Lost? Anyway, there was an Asian American woman that was also one of the main characters, and it was just a bunch of minority
She was the
characters.
most interesting character, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
Yes, she kicked ass. So anyway, and so you have new stuff like that can push that envelope, and it's stuff that's not on network television, or at least not on the basic channels, right? Because they can get away with more.
What we don't have is an Asian Marvel superhero fronting a film. I'm looking forward to that one. I don't know who character that would be.
Well,
Maybe Shang-Chi?
I was gonna say,
Shang-Chi has been picked up several times and never happened.
Yeah, when's that happening?
I wonder if it's because they don't think that Shang-Chi could carry.
I think it's more they don't think a martial arts movie will sell all that well these days. It's sort of jumped into that level.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. My next
Someday.
question.
Netflix one of these days.
Yeah, Netflix.
Yeah.
Netflix
Yeah.
takes everything. Yeah. So my next question is, how do you guys decide what you want to work on, and like, or what stories you want to tell?
Depends on what I'm looking at that day.
Okay.
I mean, really, jobs happen very quickly. It's not like movies where it takes years. When I did Warlock, I actually walked in that day to Roy and said, I want to do Warlock, and that night I was back there drawing it.
Nice.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore.
So it must be harder to do it now.
Yeah, so basically it's whatever is striking my fancy at that point. And, same with you, right?
Sure, it's freelance, so,
Is that pretty much where the money's coming
And
from?
where it's available,
That's partly true, and then, if you're lucky enough to have the choice, there's so many options on the table that you get to choose, then I think it's kind of your personal fandom to some extent. Like, that Lando cover I mentioned earlier, I took that just because I think Donald Glover is really cool.
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to draw that guy, so I turned something else down in order to take that.
Yeah, and you talked earlier about this thing on Kickstarter that we're doing with Ominous Press.
Right. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Other
whilst we're
than
here.
that is a Kickstarter out there, but the novella that we're doing there I did like 8 years ago, and sat in the drawer knowing that I would eventually find some place to put it. But this was something that I wanted to do, and I had the open space there, and wasn't scrambling around for money that particular month, so had time to do that. So it depends on what the moment is.
Is there anything that really speaks to you, and I guess not just from like the money perspective or from something cool you want to do? Is there anything like any sort of underrepresented group that speaks to you that you kind of, in the back of your mind, think about would be a fun project to do something like that or introduce that kind of a character?
For me, I don't think I set out to do that, but whatever I'm doing, I'll try to include representation just as a matter of course.
Yeah.
Like if I'm drawing a crowd scene, that will be a diverse crowd scene. If I'm forming a team, it will be a diverse team. That's just how I roll.
Yeah, and my cast in Lasgood's Boys, which is Follow What's Book on that, is a mixed bag of people just because life's a mixed bag of people these days. So, you want to be realistic. Unless you're setting something in a suburb in Ohio, it's not a all-white cast.
Right, no,
anymore.
yeah, it's never going to be.
So it depends on the story.
And do you find a lot of your interest, because again, making comics more accessible is also about being able to get the books and things like that in the hands of younger people. So do you find, are you noticing that your audiences are skewing slightly younger too, as you're getting, maybe as the movies and et cetera come out, then you have younger people interested in reading these stories?
Not me. My stories are strictly
Too dark.
kids and nightmares. No, I'm writing these things for myself, and I tend to have an older readership anyhow. So I don't know about with you.
As a cover artist, I don't know if I have a readership exactly. Like people hire me because they want to represent the book in a certain way, and so the audience for that book is way more about who is the writer, of the book and what are they going for. But most Marvel comics are, if they're not directly trying to embrace inclusivity like a Miss Marvel, then they're at least not, like the other characters who come through the book could be kind of from anywhere. So Marvel's not shying away from that.
Artists tend to be very self-indulgent too. So if there was anything good coming out of it, it's usually by accident.
Right. Like, oh, I didn't See, but that's when you go, I totally meant to do that. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. All those good
Done
feelings
the
you
line.
got from my work, I totally meant that. Yeah, you're welcome.
Totally planned.
Yeah. Did you guys have any questions for them? You are welcome to ask anything that comes to your mind.
Now that there's the comics code in place, before the comics code was in place, what was that whole time period? You growing up in the 50s, what was that about? Because of the horror, or is it just because there were war comics, or what was the reason for that comics code? And now everything has to be approved by the code.
There was a psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham who wrote a book called The Seduction of the Innocent, and Senator Kefauver of the Kefauver Commission, who busted up the New York City criminal police force, also got onto this whole thing of comics. And basically he was going after William Gaines and his horror magazines. And so they had Mr. Gaines up there for many weeks doing interviews, and he didn't help things in the least, because he brought out covers like they said, here's his cover with this man holding the head. And he said, oh, isn't that so bad? And then he'd bring out the original art and said, and he'd pull off this banner that had this type on the bottom. And he said, yeah, we really toned it down. He pulled off the banner and you'd see the neck and the blood dripping out. So a lot of that was from the horror books more than anything else. And Wortham just did a lot of crazy stuff. He went after Batman because he had this boy, and he was throwing homosexual accusations against the publisher and that. So that whole thing was nuts.
So now after that whole thing happened, what did you see like in your eyes? Because you grew up during that.
Well, I was only a kid. I mean, 1950s. Right. I was in grade school. So as far as I knew, the comic code was always this little thing on the over in the corner that I didn't pay any attention to. I don't know anybody other than a few drugstore owners in the South who may have paid attention to it one way or the other. It was something that they did to keep the Senate and the Congress off their back. It was a self-regulating agency. It was run by the guy who, one of the relatives who ran Archie Comics. And he did his job for the first few years. Any spaceship couldn't look like a missile because that was phallic. Anything with wings couldn't be shown because that was angels and making fun of, spiritual beings. Like I said, it was just crazy 1950s paranoia running rapid. And so it's there. Do they still have the comics code?
Yeah,
I don't think so anymore.
Like, if you guys play little card games, you'll notice, like, you can't see a halo on certain things. You can't see angel wings once again, or devil wings, or, like, pentagram. Yeah, there's still those kind of.
Okay, so they still have it on some books. Yeah.
It's just
I just don't work on those.
Yeah. As far as I know, the Comics Code stamp was phased out of Marvel Comics and other comics in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. But it was kind of defunct and ignored even before that. But definitely phased out. No comic that I know of, period, has the stamp on it anymore.
It sort of got killed at the time that Stan did a Spider-Man story, and then Denny O'Neil did a Green Lantern story involving drugs.
Oh.
And Code wouldn't want them to do that, and so they just removed the stamp from the particular issues, and they ran them anyhow. No, it never affected anything. And I think they just had it as a something that they put on the covers just for ornamentation after that.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, I was
Good
reading.
housekeeping.
Yeah. I mean,
There's definitely an internal guidelines, I would think, at Marvel. They don't, there's the no smoking thing and probably the pentagram thing. On the Avengers Academy game, we were asked to take a character who has a pentagram on their chest and flip it to be a normal star. That kind of thing happens. So people are watching internally.
And I think I'd have a hard time getting any publisher to do a NAMBLA superhero at this point. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
yeah,
Okay, let's cut that out of the film.
Yeah. But with Saga and things like that, have you read Saga or have you seen
Anything goes in independent publishing.
Right.
There's no thing they're beholden to.
So, do you ever do independent publishing?
I work for whoever wants to hire me.
Okay.
So sure.
So then you would just be like, look at all these penises, and you would draw them. I can explain where that comes from.
The closest I get to that is I like to do pinup covers. So I work for Zenoscope sometimes.
Yeah.
But I have my own guidelines of how far I'm willing to take that. Like I
Right.
don't do nudity. But other people have different lines where they fall. But for me, it's the no further than PG-13, no nudity, pretty much.
I don't think I've ever drawn a penis either.
Are we cutting this part out or leaving that part out?
Yeah.
Well, the penis is
Now it's getting good.
Good stuff. After hours. No, because in Saga there is this. I don't know. It's some sort of creature beast thing that has.
The
It's
dragon.
Yeah, a dragon, and it sucks its own goods.
But we're
So-
finally back to a point where comics can be anything in any genre that's beginning to flower again after many years of horror and whatever other comics being barred. I think that's great. I think that all genres should be.
Well, yeah, and the
available.
thing is, and Saga is very inclusive when it comes to LGBTQ and also with diversity of characters. And so it's not. There's still a great story. Like there's still great stories being told. It's just occasionally you have a dragon with a big tongue. So
There's an audience for that somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. Yes. And put that as one of those little Funko toys. No.
It's just at the end of the day, it's just more interesting any story you're trying to tell when there's a diverse cast of characters. If all the characters are exactly the same, how is that as fun as if they're all different?
Right, like a cat person. Right?
Yeah.
One of your characters was a giant cat
Eddie.
person?
Yes.
Right.
Oedipus, yes.
So what for you, and this is also, I guess you could say, with Drax and Thanos and all these characters, you have these more alien characters. What draws you to that kind of that kind of diversity?
Well, I usually go for the defects in the character. My characters we were talking about this earlier, I don't do heroes. I mean, this guy here is about the closest thing we have here to a hero because Steve Englehart had some influence in there. My guys are all either psychopaths, scoundrels, or damaged people, and so their ethnicity, whoever they are, is their core is much more important to me than what they look like.
Right.
And whatever the damage is, we go from there. And sometimes it works out to a white guy, black guy, Asian guy, gal, whatever. The story sort of determines that more than anything else for me.
Any other questions?
I have one. How do you avoid diversity for the sake of diversity? I mean, how does it become more organic and more natural rather than simply making sure that you have a homosexual character so that you have a homosexual character in your work, or woman because you need women in your work, or whatever?
Can I answer that for you or no? As far as you're aware, like there's a lot of people like the Me Too movement or like the women wearing pink hats. It's typically the easiest way to go about it is this person just is that, whatever it is. If they're black, Asian, gay, whatever, doesn't matter. That's a part of them, but that's not the focus of the storytelling.
Yeah, I don't usually find myself having to think along those lines because usually I'm doing science fiction, and so it's set in a much more multicultural setting than what we have here on Earth. I tend to avoid Earth stories unless it's a Batman story or something like that, just because you can make your own world and it becomes much more interesting for me to do it than to work on Earth.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's important also when you're adding in a diversity or homosexuality or like a Muslim character, because I actually have had publishers in the past that be like, would you make the parents gay? Would you mind putting a turban on this girl? And I'm like, this is awkward. Why? So yeah, and I mean, and he does have a point. It just need to be that. It needs to just be an intrinsic part of that, right? Because it's someone doesn't go, I'm going to be gay, right? They just are gay. So it's an intrinsic part of who someone is. And so when you're writing characters, so I didn't create Dr. Light, Dr. Hoshi, Kamiya Hoshi, but when I'm writing her character, the fact that the only reason people know that she's Japanese American is because when I'm describing what the characters look like, I happen to mention she's Japanese American, but I don't, she's not constantly eating fried rice, or,
Or gyoza. Or
right, and she's just being her, and then it just happens to be, also she's Japanese American. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for coming.
Try that out.
We appreciate it, yeah, and